Hi everyone, it is First Chapter Fridays, and today I'm really pleased to bring a book to you. We have a copy of it here in our library, and we also have it in Mackinvia. It's called Rolling Warrior, the incredible, sometimes awkward true story of a rebel girl on wheels who helped spark a revolution. This book is nonfiction, and it's a memoir, so the author is telling a story from her own life. And you might think, oh, I'm not into nonfiction. But this book actually reads like a regular, almost like a fiction novel. And the shocking fact is it's true. This story made my blood boil. I was shocked. I had no idea that the fights for these types of rights were so difficult. Anyway, let's talk about the book. After contracting polio as a baby in 1949 and being confined to a wheelchair because she was paralyzed, 6-year-old Judith Heumann was told she couldn't attend school because she could not walk. From then on, Judith had an uphill battle fighting for her rights in a world created for humans who can walk. In this memoir, Judith describes her journey of being cast aside and ignored, and how she used her unstoppable energy to get politicians to hear the voices of the disabled. If you like this book, I will also suggest I Am Malala, Claudette Colvin, Twice Towards Justice, and a book called How Dare the Sun. Let's move over to Mackinvia. Prologue. The thing to know about me is this. If I'd been born just 10 years earlier and my parents hadn't left Germany when they did, I would have been killed by Nazis. Hitler considered us life unworthy of life. If you were a young disabled child in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the doctors recommended that your parents hand you over to a special children's clinic where you were either starved or poisoned. When the Nazis expanded the program to include older disabled children, the doctors experimented with gassing them. 5,000 disabled kids were used as a means to test new, innovative ways of killing masses of people, which meant that we were the experiment for a campaign that was responsible for the systematic dehumanization and murder of almost 20 million people. My Jewish grandparents sent my father away from Germany before World War II, when he was 14, to go live with his uncle and 2 brothers in Brooklyn. He never saw his parents again. But in some way, he was the lucky one. My mother was only 12 when she was sent away to live with people she'd never met before. She never saw her parents again either. I guess my grandparents on both sides were worried enough about Hitler to send their kids away, but didn't think it was going to get as bad as it did. A lot of people didn't know how bad it was going to get. So you can see why, when I got sick at 1-year-old and it became clear that I was never going to walk again, and the doctor told my parents to put me in an institution, my parents were like, no way. Institutionalization was the status quo for people with disabilities when I was a child in 1949. You basically got put in a building, looked after by nurses, and your parents weren't even encouraged to visit you. There were all kinds of bad things happening in institutions to people with disabilities, which nobody was talking about. And this was in the United States, remember. She's talking now, she's in the United States. It wasn't until I was in my 20s in the 1960s that it came out that disabled people were getting locked up, beaten, starved, and used like guinea pigs for medical experiments. We were considered mentally and physically defective. Disabled kids brought stigma to the family. People thought that when someone in your family had a disability, it was because someone had done something wrong. Years later, when people would say that what we did changed the world, I said this: all we did was refuse to believe that we were the problem. In order to understand what really happened, though, let me tell you a story about what the world was like then, before we mobilized our army, took over the San Francisco Federal Building, and faced down the U.S. government, because that's what she did. So I'll begin at the beginning. Part 1, Chapter 1, Yelling at Blank Walls. I got sick when I was just 18 months old. Polio is a virus, kind of like the flu. Most people who get it are fine after a week or 2, but some end up paralyzed and not able to move. I was one of the paralyzed people. When I got better and the polio was out of my system, I still couldn't move my legs or lift my arms. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. I can lift my arms a little, just not very far. I can lift a glass and drink out of it. I can hold a fork and feed myself. I can dial numbers on my phone, type on my computer, and move my baby toe. All the important things. Here's what I can't do. I can't go to the bathroom by myself. I can't dress myself, and I can't walk. I use a wheelchair to get around. I was born just after World War II ended. Back then, there were several polio epidemics. Everyone was scared of catching it. People didn't know how it was spread, and there was no vaccine yet, so lots of people got sick. Nowadays, most people get a shot for it, which is why hardly anyone gets it anymore. For me, polio was no big deal. I was so little I don't remember feeling sick, and I don't remember ever not using a wheelchair. But apparently for everyone else, me getting paralyzed was a big deal. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in this chapter. But inching around in a world pretending that disabled kids don't exist was not the worst thing about having a disability when I was little. I'll tell you the worst thing. I was 5. It was September. I had that fluttery feeling, the one you get when something big's happening. It was the first day of kindergarten. I picked out what I wanted to wear the night before and got my mom to lay it out on the bed. That night I couldn't sleep. When I got to school the next morning, my mom pulled my chair up the steps backwards and pushed me into the building. I looked around at everything, trying to figure out where my class was, checking out all the other students. Everything was so alive. I barely noticed when a man stopped my mom in the hallway. I knew something was up, though, when I saw the look on my mom's face. Her mouth got tight and her eyes turned dark. Then she turned me around, tipped my wheelchair back, and bumped me down the steps out of school. Because back then there were no ramps anywhere, mind you. When I saw we were going back home, the butterflies in my stomach turned to rocks. But I was quiet. When my dad got home that night, my parents had a long, whispery conversation, after which my dad's shoulders got really straight in that way they do when he's very angry. I didn't go to school the next day, or the next day, or the next. When my mom told me I wasn't going to school, then my mom told me I wasn't going to school. I was going to stay home with her instead. What she didn't tell me was that the principal had said I'd be a fire hazard, which meant that if there was a fire, he thought I'd block the teachers from getting the kids out of school. I didn't understand why I had to stay home with my little brother, Joey, while everyone else I knew went to school. It made no sense. I could tell my mom thought so too, but her eyes just looked sad, like the brown leaves falling off the trees in our yard. And that begins Judith's real fight for disability rights, not just for herself, but for all people who have disabilities. This is a fascinating story. And like I said, I didn't really ever think about the fight these people had to obtain the rights that the rest of us just take for granted. I highly recommend this book, and I hope you'll try it. Once again, it is called Rolling Warrior, and we have it in Mac and Via, and we have it here in our library. I hope you'll check it out.